Well, good afternoon. It's great to see so many of you, and a number of you know me, but for those of you who don't, I'm John Levy, and I'm honored to serve as the 10th chair. On behalf of our outstanding LSC board, and we just finished our meetings a few hours ago, welcome. We're privileged to be joined by distinguished speakers, including Senator Dan Sullivan, who's being given LSC's highest award, the Champion of Justice Award, and later this afternoon we present that same award to Senator Dick Durbin. We open with a panel showcasing the critical role of legal services for veterans. LSC's GC and Air Force veteran Will Gunn moderates this panel with a fellow veteran and lawyer from Massachusetts and two legal service leaders from Louisiana and Florida. Well, a panel on protecting survivors of domestic violence and strengthening community resources follows, moderated by LSC's Vice Chair, Father Pius Petrick, featuring leaders from Ohio, Maine, and Alabama. As the nation's largest civil legal assistance funder, LSC supports 129 programs providing essential legal help to low-income families, seniors, those impacted by natural disasters, veterans, and domestic violence victims. Annually, LSC grants help over 6 million Americans. But sadly, our grantees have to turn away almost half of the eligible people seeking aid because of a lack of resources. These folks are then left to navigate complex forms, bureaucracy, and court proceedings on their own. Without legal assistance, justice really is not accessible for many Americans, and these barriers to civil justice are wholly inconsistent with our country's founding principles. It should be unacceptable that a veteran, having served and returned home, has issues accessing benefits or is served with an eviction notice and then has to face those problems without assistance. Over 1.5 million U.S. veterans qualify for LSC-funded legal help because their annual income is below 125% of the federal poverty guideline, $19,950 for an individual in 2026. For Americans faced with domestic violence, legal services safeguard victims and their children through protective orders, securing child custody, managing medical debt, and finding stable housing. Last year, LSC's grantees handled over 200,000 such cases involving domestic violence. But again, they had to turn away almost as many due to a lack of resources. And research shows that 83% of victims having legal representation are far more likely to obtain a protective order compared to only 32% when going it alone. Every year, our incredible national network of legal services organizations stretch their resources to serve these populations, utilizing every possible approach and innovation to reach as many clients as they can. For veteran services, they participate in stand-down events and clinics They established medical legal partnerships with VA hospitals, connecting lawyers to patients. The LSC grantees maintain hotlines and help desks while nurturing strong community partnerships with other survivor service providers. Well, despite our funding challenges, I remain optimistic and determined about the prospects for increasing access to justice. Our grantees are working to integrate AI into their work systems to greatly expand capacity and resources for client services. Regulatory reform is expanding the use of community justice workers, hopefully furthering the availability of legal assistance. Well, many of you are here for ABA Day, and this is not just any ABA Day. We are nearing the 250th anniversary of our nation's founding. And particularly in this year, we must recognize that these barriers to access to justice are inconsistent, wholly inconsistent, with our country's founding principles. As Thomas Jefferson wrote, the most sacred of the duties of government is to do equal and impartial justice to all its citizens. Well, that promise cannot be kept without our investment in it. And when research now shows that on average across the country, these legal aid services return $7 for every $1 invested to the local community. What are we waiting for? 7 for 1? I'll take that any day. And it's on all of us. Only through our actions, our dedication, our determination and investment can we make equal justice a reality for all Americans. Let's do it in our time. Thank you so much. It's now my privilege to introduce our board member, John Malcolm. He's Vice President of the Edwin Meese III Institute for the Rule of Law at Advancing American Freedom. John, thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, John Levy is always a tough act to follow, so I won't really try. So as you heard, I'm on the LSC board. It's both a pleasure and a privilege to serve on that board. So supporting veterans is a critical part of LSC's mission, and I'm very proud to have co-chaired, along with Abby Kuzma, LSC's Veterans Task Force, which is now in its 5th year. The legal challenges facing veterans are as vast as they are varied, and they can, of course, show up at any time during the course of a veteran's life. Last year alone, Legal Services Corporation grantees across the country served 44,000 veterans with issues such as housing loss, family safety, income stability. And in just a few moments, you're going to hear from a very distinguished panel of speakers who are going to delve into the issue, and they are going to be moderated, I'm quite sure expertly so, by LSC's General Counsel, Will Gunn. So Will, take it away.
Make sure you get your mouth next to this.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's also a pleasure and an honor to talk about a subject that is near and dear to my heart. 16 years ago, I was serving as the General Counsel for the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. And at that point, under the leadership of the then Secretary, Eric K. Shinseki, he set as his goal ending veterans homelessness. Various people said that that was a crazy goal to have, especially in this city where you're measured all the time by your words. And they encouraged him to do things such as, why don't you set as a goal substantially reducing veterans homelessness? But he said something that has stayed with me, and that is, I would much rather be guilty of going after a bridge too far than not doing everything in my power to end this national stain. This issue of ending veterans homelessness is closely related, closely tied to our theme today, and that is providing legal assistance to veterans. You see, each year, the Department of Veterans Affairs does a survey. That survey, under the name of Project Challenge, looks at what is the Department of Veterans Affairs doing well with respect to homeless veterans and those who are at risk of homelessness and those things that we're not doing well. Unfortunately, consistently, meeting legal needs falls to the top of that list. In fact, legal needs dominate the top 10 list of things that we as Americans are not doing well. So we're fortunate today to have with us a panel that can talk about what can we do as Americans to protect our promise of providing access to justice for those who have served. I'd like to call up for us members of our distinguished panel today. And as they're coming up, I'd like to just mention we have with us, closest to me, Laura Tuggle, who is the Executive Director of Southeast Louisiana Legal Services. Laura brings the perspective of a legal aid leader, one who has been working to identify community needs and ensure that veterans receive the services and support that they need. In fact, I'm going to talk more about a subject that Laura and her team played a key role in just a moment. Next to Laura, we have Pi Young. Pi is the managing attorney at Bay Area Legal Services, which is headquartered in the Tampa Bay area, Florida. Pi works directly with veterans and leads outreach efforts designed to connect veterans with legal help and other community resources. Then, while I'm tempted to say I'm calling upon a former Marine, but the reality is that once a Marine, always a Marine. And we have with us Nick Hassenfuss. Nick is a Marine Corps veteran and is now a partner at Holland & Knight in Boston. He's also a member of LSC's Leaders Council and served on our Veterans Task Force. Throughout his legal career, Nick has helped organize and has participated in legal clinics serving veterans. He's also worked with the ABA and various veterans organizations to highlight the importance of civil legal services for veterans. Now, as John mentioned, I am a veteran myself. I'm an Air Force veteran. And the Air Force, we have a slogan that flexibility is the key to air power. We have to be flexible today. You see, we were going to have a film, but we didn't get the audio visual support. Someone didn't get the memo. So just to tell you about a little bit about the film that we're going to have, if it were here, you'd hear a veteran tell his own story. That veteran, by the name of Larry Savage, was 70 years old when he got a notice from the Department of Veterans Affairs saying that you owe over $50,000, $52,000. And if you don't pay this right away, we're not only going to garnish your VA benefits, but we're going to take your Social Security benefits as well. Larry said, if you do that, I'm going to be homeless. But he called upon Laura's organization, Southeast Louisiana Legal Services. And the lawyers on Laura's team made the difference. He was able to keep his benefits. He was able to keep his housing. Just telling you just a little bit about the important work that's being done. With that in mind, I'd like to, I just want to shift for a moment, Laura, and call upon you with respect to this. From your vantage point there in Louisiana, are there times that these issues come to light? Is there a particular time that you see this in operation?
Well, we've been working on providing, hold on, flexible.
There you go.
Okay, I got it. We've been working on behalf of vulnerable veterans in Southeast Louisiana and our program for almost a decade now. And that really started out as something that was three different factors coming together. You mentioned the goal of the VA to end veterans homelessness. That was happening when we really started looking at this work. We also were looking at the fact that in Louisiana, we have 36% of our veterans that are considered ALICE, which is a United Way term, which stands for Asset Limited Income Constrained Yet Employed. It really rolls off the tongue there. And though we don't have the most veterans of any state, we had the highest pro rata percentage of ALICE veterans, 36% of all veterans in Louisiana. And across the country, the lowest it goes down to is 21% in Wisconsin. So that's nothing to be proud of, and definitely not keeping the promises that we're trying to talk about today. And then thirdly, we had a situation where the New Orleans Bar Foundation came to us and said, hey, we want to raise some money for you guys. What's one of your most urgent needs? And we said, we want to do a better job of serving veterans. And so those things kind of all came together for us. And that was the very beginning of the work, which we've been able to expand. And one of the things for us where issues really pop up for veterans, I'm usually here talking about disasters in rooms like this. But whenever there is a disaster, the percentage of veterans that seek our services to resolve issues around FEMA benefits or housing or evictions or all those kind of issues that percolate up, we have a 750% increase in veterans seeking our services after the last couple of disasters. So that is definitely something that we're really aware of in our state.
Thanks, Laura. Nick, from your experience, what do civil legal needs actually look like for veterans? And when do they tend to arise? Just after they get out, or is there any particular time?
Yeah, that's a good question, Will. You mentioned the VA challenge survey, and I just want to focus on that as well. And the 2024 survey found that 7 of the top 10 needs of homeless veterans were legal assistance. And a 2021 LSC Justice Gap survey found that 76% of low-income veteran households had at least one civil legal problem during the one-year measurement period. It also found that 44% had 5 or more civil legal problems. And that survey also found that low-income veteran households did not receive enough or any legal help for 84% of their civil legal problems. And I think that just helps highlight that veterans can face civil legal issues at any time. And, I like to put them in 3 broad categories. One, VA benefits. Folks are generally, familiar with VA benefits and that veterans can receive VA benefits. It's not as easy as one might think it should be, and it takes a lot of work. And as Will talked about the story, that sometimes there's issues once you receive VA benefits, like overpayment issues. Those were prevalent years ago and is starting to slow down a little. Another one is discharge upgrades. So veterans have a discharge status. Folks usually have heard of an honorable discharge and a dishonorable discharge. There's a bunch in between. And the discharge status, it does a few different things, but one of the biggest things is it can entitle you to certain benefits. If you have a dishonorable discharge, you're not going to be eligible for, VA disability benefits, the GI Bill, the VA home loan program, all those hallmarks of the things that we're doing for veterans. And that makes sense if you have a dishonorable discharge and it's warranted. But there's also all sorts of discharge statuses in between honorable and dishonorable. And what we've seen a lot of, and there's been a lot of change from really great work from folks, is that veterans with PTSD or PTSD resulting from MST, military sexual trauma, are discharged with discharge statuses that don't really make sense because they had conduct related to, their mental health conditions that occurred in service. So there's a lot of work going on to upgrade those discharges. We call them typically discharge upgrade petitions. So those veterans, will be able to receive the benefits that they're entitled to, which I think really ties directly to reflecting on the promise of justice for veterans. And then the third category is what I just call civil legal issues veterans face. And that's, issues that we all have that are civil legal issues, can be housing, family law, employment, expungement of records, all sorts of things that now veterans are facing.
Thanks, Nick. Pi, building on that, how do these issues tend to show up in the lives of veterans? And as I understand it from our past conversation, there are times that you confront or you encounter veterans who don't even know that they have a legal issue. They just know they have an issue.
That's exactly correct. A lot of times when we think about assisting veterans, we think about the big ticket items, some of which Nick has outlined, a discharge upgrade. But a discharge upgrade takes some time. So what is the nature of the veteran's life in the meantime, in between time? How can we assist? There's a lot of different options. There's like a character of service evaluation where if that veteran doesn't have access to medical care, we can at least get them some interim services. A lot of times when we encounter veterans, they are coming to our clinics or our medical legal partnership for one reason. It is important that our team and our advocates and our paralegals listen to what the veteran is saying and what the veteran is not saying. Oftentimes when we have a crisis issue, we look at the big crisis and we don't look at some of the supplemental things that have led to this crisis. And so with informed advocacy, right, with being an attorney who listens to the veteran and listens in between the lines, like I tell my team, we can categorize a lot of those issues. So discharge upgrade and discharge status might be one, but the other issue that's underlying is that has a direct impact on benefits that I'm not receiving. It could have a direct impact on the income that you're not receiving, right? Or other benefits that you're not receiving because of your status. But then there's other things, quality of housing, right? Limited income often equals limited quality of housing. We're looking at, what are the other things that are going on in your life? Do you have access to your children? And so from that conversation typically yields multifaceted issues, and then we're able to triage what's the crisis issue and what are the underlying issues. And a lot of that comes from just having the conversation and listening to what the needs are without telling the veteran, this is what we're going to do for you, right? We need to listen and to hear what their needs truly are.
Pi, if you could, you mentioned a term that I don't believe everyone is familiar with, and that's medical legal partnership.
Yes.
Can you just explain what that is and why it matters?
So a medical legal partnership is essentially where legal services partners with typically a moderate to low income healthcare facility. In our case, it is the VA. In 2017, this concept started at the VA basically as a novelty, right? And it's like, well, we'll put some legal aid attorneys on site and see what happens. But it's deeper than just having a legal clinic on site. A medical legal partnership is where legal service advocates and their support team is embedded in the medical facility. In our case, it's the Bay Pines VA in our region. And from 2017 until now, we've been able to grow our medical legal partnership legal clinics from 1 location to 7 locations in a 5-county service area. How do we do that? It's relationship building. We talk about it all the time in the work that we do, so that we build a relationship with the social work team in our VAs, because a lot of times those are the people who are encountering the veterans and their needs first. So we build a relationship with the social work team. We build a relationship with the healthcare team. We build a relationship with different departments throughout the VA so that when there is a need that is beyond what social work can meet, they know automatically we can contact legal services. A lot of times I talk about this concept of warm referrals. If we give a client or a veteran a piece of paper and we say, okay, call this number and let's see if someone answers and gets help, versus you're the social worker, I'm the advocate. You call over to me and say, hey, I have a client here. I can't disclose any information. However, I'm going to refer them to you. Can you meet with them? Can you talk to them? That's going to bridge the gap of services for our veterans. They're already dealing with a lot of things. The medical legal partnership model is more than just a clinic on site. It is a relationship, and we've been able to develop this relationship with the VA over the past 9 years. And it is not just germane or unique to Tampa Bay or the Bay Pines VA and Bay Area Legal Services. It is a national model that we hope to see continue to grow.
Thanks, Pi. Laura, the 2 words just jumped out at me in terms of what Pi was just saying: relationship, partnership. In your organization, Southeast Louisiana Legal Services, how have you approached building these relationships and partnerships? And why does that matter?
It matters because you're not going to be able to effectively serve veterans or really anybody else unless you're building the trust. And when we started doing that work, focused on veterans, initially we started doing this work at what we called at that time our homeless unit, because this was coming at us from a place of, in part, ending veterans' homelessness. And right about the time that we were considering, how are we going to do this? What's the best way? Somebody thought, oh, wait, the VA hospital, which has been closed down since Hurricane Katrina, is about to reopen 10 years later in 2015. And so we went and had a conversation with the VA, and we thought it was going to be a hard conversation, and they were kind of like, come on in. This is a service we don't provide, and we want, we had to get past the, are you going to sue us for medical malpractice and all those kind of things. And we're not. But it was a very easy conversation to have and a very welcoming approach. And one of the very first things we learned was that if we expected veterans to want to have anything to do with us, yes, we have all these needs, but there are serious trust issues, maybe some bad experiences with the legal system before. And if you call yourself the homeless unit, veterans do not want to receive services, at least that's what we found. So we changed our name for that department to the Veterans and Innovative Projects Unit, the VIP unit, and started having a lot more folks either access us on site at the VA when we really got going. We've expanded from 1 location to 6 locations now, and are in multiple different parishes throughout Southeast Louisiana. One other thing that we think is really important too, besides the medical legal model, and Pi alluded to this, part of that building trust and reliability is you have to go to where the veterans are. If you think that folks are going to traipse down to your downtown office where there's no parking and, it's inconvenient, yes, that happens sometimes, but you really need to try to figure out how do we remove those barriers. And sometimes that's being at the VA, but sometimes veterans, unfortunately, might not have the best experience always at the VA, and maybe there's a different partner. So we've been working with an organization in New Orleans recently called The Bastion, which is a mixed income housing complex which has some units set aside for veterans with traumatic brain injuries and other types of disabilities that veterans are living with. And they are about to open a wellness center to try to provide supportive services beyond just the veterans who are on site there. And that center is about to open up, and next month we're actually doing our first expungement clinic exclusively for veterans. We also have some partnership with veterans treatment courts in Louisiana. We have 3 in our service area. And so that is, each kind of group or subset of veterans that we're working with, yes, there's some similarities, but some veterans are more likely to have certain types of legal issues than necessarily maybe like a Vietnam War era veteran. So it's really about where are the partnerships, where can you connect with veterans, how do you make people feel comfortable, and a big component on the medical legal partnership is we also have to be regularly training the staff, whether it's the parking lot attendant guy who is talking to veterans all the time, or whether it's the doctor or the social worker or the case manager, because there's always a lot of turnover. So a big part of it is every so often, you've got to train your partners about who we are, and those folks that are helping support veterans also often don't realize that a problem a veteran's experiencing may have a legal solution. So that's a really important part too.
I'll jump in there, Laura. I'll tell you about the training. We always say, when in doubt, refer. Right? Don't take it upon yourself to decipher whether or not they have a legal need. Just refer it, and we'll talk it through, and then we'll see if we can assist.
Pi, both you and Laura, again, touching on this issue of relationships and partnerships. One of the things that I've heard, well, one of the things I know is that women, in particular amongst veterans, that is the fastest growing cohort of people that formerly served in the military. But women don't always identify with the term veteran in and of itself. So how does that play out if you are dealing with somebody trying to help, but they don't even understand the terminology that you're using?
So that's actually a really great point. I'm glad that you brought that up, because a lot of times it's not just the women veterans that don't identify, it's just people in general. We have this concept, right? But it's important that we are very targeted, specific, deliberate to build relationships with women veterans, to build relationships with the women veterans departments through our VAs and through our community organizations that support women veterans. A lot of times we'll get a client that calls in, and during the screening or the intake, we determine that this client that is called in is also a veteran. But they didn't highlight that. They didn't call in for veterans-related services. And so we will put them in our veterans unit, but it's important that they also have the identity of equality, access, entitlement to all rights that any other veteran has. And so sometimes, as Nick mentioned, there are things that happen in the military that certain veterans and a lot of our women veterans don't want to have a conversation about again. And the reality of that is that we now make sure that the relationship is there, the trust is there. And if they don't want to address that, that's okay, right? There may be other needs, but we have got to make sure that we are present, that we are building relationships with social workers, with departments who provide services to women veterans. In fact, one of our funders that Laura and I share is Department of Veterans Affairs. One of our requirements for that funding is that we have a certain percentage of assistance that's directly put towards women veterans, their needs and their services. And that is very important, often overlooked, but extremely important. Thank you for highlighting that.
Certainly. Nick, you come at this not from the legal aid perspective, but you're a partner in a large law firm. So how do free legal clinics and other pro bono services work in the, or fit into this idea of providing legal services to veterans?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Will. And you know, at Holland and Knight, I've been overseeing our military and veteran pro bono since 2016. I just pulled up the numbers. We've done 51,500 plus hours, valued at over 35.8 million in that time span. And I just say that because the private bar, particularly big law, we have resources that folks can use, and we're happy to do those things. But it's a little bit harder for us to get involved when you're part of the private bar. And I say that because, you know, when you think about the legal issues that a lot of veterans are facing that we talked about earlier, it might not be the things that big law attorneys are practicing. My practice area is IP licensing and technology transactions. But I do a lot of veterans work because I've learned about it, I'm passionate about it, and that's very important to me and the firm. And one of the things that I would say freaks out private bar attorneys is to, you know, get over their skis in a practice area that they're not familiar with. So things like legal clinics can be really helpful for participation of private bar attorneys, particularly if it's about a subset of law that they know something about. So maybe you have a bankruptcy team that wants to help with, you know, bankruptcy issues and other types of credit issues. And that's something that they do as part of their private practice and can easily transfer. Clinics are also great for in-house attorneys. So a lot of times in-house attorneys, you know, if you're at a company and you're hired by that company to be a lawyer, you might not be able to send out an engagement letter to set up an attorney-client relationship. So by being able to participate in a clinic, and if that clinic, you know, is sponsored by a legal aid organization that has malpractice insurance that's covering the clinic, now all those folks are covered and they're, you know, a lot less freaked out. And those folks that maybe can't engage clients directly outside of their organization can now participate and give back. The other thing that's really helpful for the private bar is legal aid partnerships with great legal aid organizations like the ones here that we're discussing, and those organizations that can provide training and mentorship to the private bar attorneys that maybe aren't as familiar with the cases. So some of them, you know, like expunging criminal records. Most, you know, big firm attorneys don't do that as a day-to-day practice. But with some training and some mentorship, we certainly have the resources and the ability to do it. We just want to make sure that we're able to you know, ask questions when they come up. The other thing that I think the private bar is great for is like impactful matters that take a lot of time. So, Will, you mentioned the ABA. I was in the ABA Standing Committee for Legal Assistance for Military Personnel, which I know you're the chair of now. And, you know, Holland and Knight helped write several proposed resolutions and present them, and those can take hundreds of hours to do. And again, the private bar is here with those resources to help out. And you know, finally, what I think we will all can comment on is once you start doing good work, veterans tell other veterans, and you start getting all sorts of calls from all their friends, and that feels great. It feels great when a veteran client tells you like, "Hey, I just gave your card to 10 different people at my VA clinic." But that's good because, as you've heard, it can sometimes be hard to get that trust with the veteran that's experiencing legal issues. If a veteran's had a great experience and is telling his veteran buddies, and now we can help a bunch, you're just, you know, building the trust pretty naturally that way.
So I've gotten a signal telling me that we're now in our speed round. And so with respect to that, people hear statistics, but stories meet their hearts. And so from a story perspective, does anybody have anything that they'd like to share that's really burning at them that this audience needs to hear?
I want to tell you a little bit about Robert. Robert was a 54-year-old double amputee on disability benefits, a formerly homeless veteran. And he actually, when he got off the street, he went to a rural area. But this particular area was served by one of our medical legal partnership locations through the VA. And he got connected with us. One of those case managers at the VA recognized, hey, I don't know exactly what's going on, but Robert's food stamps are about to get cut off. And once we looked at the issue, what was going on, which is fairly common, is Robert had multiple interrelated legal issues stemming from, it turned out, being the victim of identity theft. Someone was working on a goat farm in Florida.
To Florida.
Who had taken on his identity, social security number. Meanwhile, this gentleman is living in Livingston Parish in rural Louisiana, you know, hanging out a lot on his front porch, talking to his neighbors. And we ended up figuring out what was going on after calling the goat farmer guy and figuring out that this was definitely an identity fraud situation. So we were able to get an administrative hearing and stop his food stamps from being cut off. But then because he was on benefits, it was going to get reported that there was earned income, so we had to try to head that off before it became another issue. And then we realized after we solved those two issues, wait a minute, the same data about income is probably also going to get reported to the IRS. And so we ended up helping Robert with like multiple legal issues. But for the fact that that case manager said, hey, maybe legal aid can help you with your food stamps. A lot of people might not have ever thought of that. We were able to keep Robert housed and keep Robert fed. So that was pretty fantastic. But an everyday issue that happens with a lot of veterans. Oh, thank you. I didn't do it myself. That was my team.
Yes. Do we have time for another quick?
Hi, I'm not even looking up, so you need to go ahead.
All right, so I'll quickly share. We, of course, have tons of stories, right? So I'll share one that is near and dear to our hearts in Florida because of our natural disasters. And LSC has also prioritized disaster relief, especially in areas like Florida, and we have an entire disaster relief team at Bay Area Legal. So we had a veteran that came in and they were thinking that they were just having a regular eviction, like, oh, I've fallen behind. But the eviction stemmed from like fees, right? They lived in a mobile home. There was damage to their mobile home that was not repaired, so they were being fined. And then they had fallen behind on lot rent. And, it kind of was cumulative. The veteran had been in the hospital and just life had gotten in the way. And so what happened is, in essence, is that the veteran did receive money to repair some of the damage to their mobile home unit, paid a contractor. This is where looking below the surface really does make a difference. Paid a contractor to repair the damage, and the contractor took the money and never did the work. So here is a veteran in crisis mode, right? We talk about crises. And so it wasn't a traditional eviction. It was there was a reason. There was a good reason for this. And so of course the veteran was trying to call and get this done, and they were out of the money. And so we were able to get involved. We were able to notify the sheriff's department to make a few phone calls and do some investigation on this contractor. And long story short, I'll cut some of the details, but the contractor did come out and do the work. We were able to negotiate with the mobile home park to allow for additional time. This is the power of advocacy. A lot of times when our clients come in, they've gone toe to toe with the landlord or the mobile home park, and they're not getting anywhere. Enter the attorney. Right? And the tone of the conversation just changes. And that is the power of advocacy on behalf of our clients. And so essentially, he was able to get his mobile home unit repaired. He was able to remain in his mobile home, and his housing was preserved. And so that is just a portion of the type of work that we do. We handle consumer issues, identity fraud cases, sealing and expungement. We talked about that a little bit, in addition to the big ticket veterans issues like discharge upgrades or pension or garnishment issues. And so we try to gather as many good outcome stories, because it's good for people to know that the work that we do does have a significant impact on the lives of veterans.
And I'm going to jump. I'm going to jump in with a story before Will tells me I don't have time. I'm not even going to ask if we have time, but this is related to the power of advocacy. I like that phrase, Pi. It's much better than what I usually say is the power of letterhead. But, yours is way better, but I appreciate that. So one of my clients was a Vietnam-era veteran, and this sort of talks about when do civil legal issues pop up. This was about 4 years ago. He was a prisoner of war in Vietnam, someone that, almost, or I would think every person here in the room would want to support. And he was on a month-to-month lease for about 10 years, and his landlord said, hey, that's it, time to get out. He said to the landlord, hey, can I just stay here 3 more months so my daughter can finish the school year? The landlord said, absolutely not. And by the way, you owe about $5,000 in damages because, the apartment doesn't look like it did when I rented it to you 10 years ago. Shocking. So, we got involved, and, immediately with the power of advocacy, the tone just changed. And, to cut to the chase here, we ended up securing at least 4 months for the veteran at the apartment, so he could his daughter could finish the school year. We arranged for a veteran-friendly unit inspection from a third-party contractor. Advised him very carefully of the details, and all the damages were found to be wear and tear over 10 years. Again, power of advocacy. And then the best part of this story is that I found another agency that helped with his moving expenses, Easter Seals. They were awesome. And we were able to help him use the VA home loan so he could buy his very first house.
Beautiful. You've heard it. Interconnected. Relationships matter. Partnerships making the difference. And the power of advocacy, or of letterhead. So can you please join me in thanking our panelists today? Now I'm pleased to welcome my colleague, Mitrang Nguyen, to the front of the room to lead our last discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. I'll let my wonderful panelists gather here. You may notice there's a height difference between Will Gunn and myself. I will make up for that with projecting my voice. I think I could match him in sound potentially if I don't with height. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Mitrang Nguyen, and I'm the Senior Program Counsel for Pro Bono Innovation at the Legal Services Corporation. I'm also a board member of the DC Coalition of Domestic Violence, and it's really my pleasure to moderate this second conversation with you at our forum. Before we begin, I want to just note that our conversation is going to address domestic violence, which is an issue that has likely touched many of us, whether through personal experience or through the experience of someone we know or love. If at any point you find the discussion difficult, please feel free to take care of yourself and step away. We also have team members from the DC Coalition Against Domestic Violence here to offer support. So step away at the table and they'll be happy to offer resources to you. Domestic violence. This is an issue that affects people across profession, age, neighborhood, income, every pocket of our community and country. And while overall violent crime has gone down in a lot of places, and that's something to celebrate, many advocates and law enforcement officials who you'll hear from today are seeing the opposite trend in their communities. For survivors, the path to safety often means navigating systems that are not always trauma-informed. That means recognizing the mental and psychological toll that domestic violence can take on them as individuals. And it's also not always survivor-centered. That means it's not putting their voice and their agency at the center. And this causes additional harm. And sometimes this can include the legal system. From protective orders to child custody, housing, employment, benefits. Survivors face complex legal needs in an already risky and stressful moment in their lives. Legal services organizations play a critical role in helping survivors understand their rights and options, and they're part of a broader network of support, one which many of you in this audience are a part of, that moves survivors towards safety and stability. I'm excited to be joined in our conversation today with these wonderful individuals, 3 leaders working on different parts of that ecosystem, that network for survivors, survivor services, legal aid, and law enforcement. Alicia Williamson is the Senior Director of Survivor Services at the Ohio Domestic Violence Network. Alicia brings such deep perspective and experience across the survivor services field. It's a real privilege to have her here with us today. Before her work at the network, she was the executive director of a domestic violence shelter. And earlier in her career, she worked as a paralegal with the Legal Services Program in Ohio, helping survivors navigate the civil justice system. Tom Fritchie, executive director of Pine Tree Legal Assistance in Maine, one of our nation's leading legal aid programs. Tom has spent his career expanding access to justice in rural communities and has seen firsthand how legal services attorneys support domestic violence survivors through complex legal challenges towards safety and family stability. Chief Michael Pickett is the chief of police for Birmingham, Alabama. Chief Pickett brings the perspective of law enforcement officers who work directly with families and communities affected by domestic violence. And under his leadership, the Birmingham Police Department is working to address domestic violence holistically and as a key partner in the community. Thank you for joining us. Alicia, you just bring so many hats to this table, and you have such deep experience supporting domestic violence survivors through direct services, through policy work. Can you set the stage for us? From a survivor's perspective, what is the most important thing for us to understand when it comes to effectively supporting them?
Every day across the country, survivors of domestic violence is making the most dangerous decision of their lives, and that is the decision to leave. What many people don't realize is that leaving is not just about safety. It requires navigating systems, housing systems, legal systems, and trauma all at the same time. And the systems designed to support survivors are under tremendous strain. We are in the midst of a housing crisis. If survivors don't have financial stability, if they don't have strong credit, if they don't have rental history, safe housing becomes incredibly difficult. Legal barriers is another added layer. Survivors often need support with protection orders, divorce, custody, and even eviction as a direct result of their abuse. When programs that are designed to support survivors are stretched thin, it makes it impossible for survivors to get the help that they need. And we are seeing the consequences of that here in Ohio. 2025 marked the deadliest year for domestic violence fatalities, with 157 lives that was lost. That was a 37% increase from the previous year. I believe in the power of the collective. When systems are working in tandem with each other, for survivors, we can create sustainability for that survivor. For one clear example of that is what we did in Ohio with strangulation. For years, survivors told us that it was one of the most terrifying forms of abuse, yet the system did not fully recognize it. Cases were often treated as minor offenses, and we now know that strangulation is one of the strongest predictors of future homicide. But survivors spoke up, advocates elevated their voices, medical professionals brought the evidence, fatality reviews confirmed it, and policymakers acted upon that, recognizing strangulation as a distinct felony offense in 2023. This is what it looks like when the ecosystem is working with and for survivors. We create pathways for justice and ultimately life-saving change. Because when we get it right, lives are saved. But when we get it wrong, consequences are irreversible.
Thank you, Alicia, for those powerful words and for reminding us how important it is for us to stay connected. There's so much intentionality around those complex systems to keep them going and supporting one another. Chief Pickett, Alicia mentioned a crime statistic of a 37% increase in domestic violence in Ohio. And again, while violent crime is declining in many places, you've shared yourself that your officers are seeing an increase in domestic violence incidents in Birmingham, and you're prioritizing attention to that issue. What domestic violence trends are you seeing in Birmingham that concern you right now?
So yes, ma'am. So in 2024 in Birmingham, we experienced our most deadly year ever in our history. But we were able to make significant progress in reducing our crime by 45% in 2025. However, what's remained is a glaring evidence that domestic violence is still remaining a major issue. So while we focused on the intentionality of targeted enforcement and things of that nature as it relates to our homicides, we improved our clearance rate as it relates to our homicide investigation cases to prevent retaliation, to prevent reoffending. We noticed that domestic violence is still remaining a large issue in our community as it relates to driving the violent crime. Now, one of the issues is that, quite frankly, as police, we cannot police someone's living room. We can't be in the homes. So it's really important that, essentially we have some type of resources to address that issue, because as police, we just can't be in the homes. And that's where most domestic violence situations take place, is inside our residences.
Thank you. So how are you raising awareness about the issue in Birmingham? What can a police department do to try to reduce these trends and reduce domestic violence?
So we try to use a comprehensive approach. One of the things that I noticed last year when we try to analyze our data. And in analyzing it, we noticed last year, I'll say in the fourth quarter of last year, I noticed that it was about 7 or 8 homicides that were domestic violence related. So that being said, this year, I wanted to focus on domestic violence. So one of the things that we did was I called a meeting with our city attorney's office, our district attorney's office, One Place, which is a center locally in Birmingham that works with victims of domestic violence, our U.S. Attorney's Office. So we brought the group together, met at the police headquarters, and we talked about what can we do from the enforcement end to help streamline things, and also how can we communicate, because a lot of times law enforcement, we're the first persons on the scene. If it's not the paramedics or the fire department, we're the first person on the scene responding to a domestic violence call. So how can we, as first responders, get them the resources that they need immediately, and also in a discreet manner? Because sometimes people are in situations to where if you hand them a pamphlet that's got some type of resources with, domestic violence number or a number to call or legal resources, the offender might see that, the abuser might see that, and it may create a more volatile situation later on. So one of the things that we're trying to do in Birmingham is we redesigned our case cards that we issue for reports.
Yes.
And we just want to implement a code or something on there, or just different avenues of ways to reach out and get information and resources to those individuals in a discreet manner. And also having our officers be more aware and better trained on what the resources are to be able to get to the victims of these occurrences of domestic violence.
Thank you, Chief Pickett. Tom, when survivors come to a legal aid organization, what kinds of legal issues are they facing?
Thank you, Betran. Survivors of domestic violence come to legal aid organizations needing help to find safety, stability in their housing, finances, access to education, health care, fair determinations of child custody, and much more. All these problems have civil legal aid solutions that protect victims, help them stabilize their lives, and prevent the risk of suffering violence again in the future. In Maine, a protection from abuse order is the primary civil process available for victims, and it limits or prohibits contact by the abuser, can include other individualized relief, and it can be enforced by law enforcement. One study found that having a permanent protective order in place was associated with an 80% reduction in police-reported physical violence within the next year. Because court-appointed attorneys are not provided for civil legal needs, people with low income can only access these essential protections through nonprofit legal service providers like Pine Tree Legal and the other grantees of Legal Services Corporation around the country. According to one study, 83% of victims represented by an attorney successfully obtain protective orders, whereas just 32% of victims who proceed without counsel succeed. And as Senator Sullivan noted, research further indicates that the public service that most significantly reduces the long-term risk of domestic abuse is victims' access to legal aid. Pine Tree Legal Assistance also prioritizes holistic legal aid that addresses survivors' immediate safety needs as well as long-term recovery. 2/3 of our clients who receive protection from abuse help also receive services from us in one or more additional areas of civil legal need. These include efforts to stabilize clients' financial security, housing, and education. I'm going to briefly highlight. So because of our many years of work with survivors, we have expertise identifying civil legal protections that support or strengthen survivors' financial stability. And these include financial compensation for damage to property or our client through the protective order process, but also employment protections if, for example, survivors suffered sexual assault by coworkers, unemployment compensation for survivors who had to flee their job in order to escape sexual assault, resolution of IRS or consumer problems caused by behavior by the offender. And according to the Maine Coalition to End Domestic Violence, survivors of domestic violence in Maine identified debt as one of the most urgently pressing problems that they face right after leaving an abusive relationship. So we use, in collaboration with our Consumer Protection Unit, national model approaches with our local council to alleviate issues with third-party debt, auto loans, student loans, and utility debt. We also provide survivors with legal assistance on housing issues, including eviction and access to public housing, foreclosure defense, and other issues. And survivors who are students, we know face long-term economic damage if they're unable to complete educational programs as a result of sexual assault or domestic violence. And so we advocate for survivors sometimes in school disciplinary proceedings to use other tools to help them continue and complete education.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it underscores how at each stage, Tom, I mentioned earlier, each stage in life, age doesn't, it can touch your lives, and you will see survivors at different stages. When you're talking about schools, folks who are looking at trying to find their own housing for the first time, you're underscoring a point that I think is important to make, it how it spans across and touches so many lives at different stages.
That's right. One client story I'd like to highlight that helps illustrate several of these themes coming together is a client of ours named Celia, who's given permission for us to share her story. On a cold December night, Celia was assaulted and locked out of her house by her then boyfriend. She was 8 months pregnant at the time. After the assault, she noticed that the baby wasn't moving as much as normal. When her daughter was born, she was diagnosed with cerebral palsy and a heart condition that made her medically very fragile. Celia's relationship ended, and she began raising her daughter with almost no involvement from her ex. An advocate at Through These Doors, the local domestic violence resource center, referred Celia to Pine Tree Legal Assistance so that she would not have to navigate the complex legal process alone. Maris Hubbard, an attorney with our Family Law and Victim Rights Unit, represented Celia in her case. And although Celia's ex was uncooperative throughout the process and created significant barriers along the way, including trying to terminate his own parental rights to avoid child support, our attorney, Maris, was creative and zealous in her advocacy, and after the final hearing, the magistrate awarded Celia sole parental rights and responsibilities, granted her request to change their daughter's last name to match her own, established an ongoing child support order, and ordered her ex to pay more than $17,000 in child support arrears. That has enabled Celia and her daughter to move out and into their own apartment, and for Celia to begin studying to become an EMT herself, pursue her passion for photography, and help her daughter find a safe and stable life. Her daughter is now walking and talking.
That's great. Thank you, Tom. Thank you for sharing that. Tom, I want to ask you a quick follow-up question, building on something that Senator Sullivan said. He talked about the rate of domestic violence homicides in Alaska, and I can't help but make the connection with Alaska and Maine, which is a very rural state. So you're talking vast areas, limited access to services, transportation barriers, no broadband. These create more isolation for those experiencing domestic violence. What challenges do rural survivors in particular face when legal help is far away or difficult to access?
Even with our team's massive effort, like for example, just in 2025, we handled over 1,300 domestic violence cases. There's still a massive unmet need statewide. In Maine, 89% of parties in protection from abuse cases proceed without counsel. And in our most rural counties, like Aroostook, Piscataquis, and Washington counties, 95 to 96% of parties in protective order cases are unrepresented. And we know of cases of survivors who filed a petition for protection from abuse on their own and withdrew it because they thought that they had no chance at all because their ex was using the family finances to hire a lawyer for himself, and she couldn't find a legal aid lawyer if we weren't available. One of the ways we maximize our impact in rural areas is we partner closely with Maine's domestic violence resource centers, part of the network similar to Alicia and her colleagues' network in Ohio. Right. And they provide referrals to us for clients who would most benefit from legal aid. And then we conduct an initial intake, meet with the client, and provide legal representation to resolve cases through negotiation or litigation in court. Is there time to share one more client story that illustrates?
I was going to ask if you can do that as your final point
Will
while
do
I
that.
wrap up.
Okay.
I did want to ask, and I hope you will share it, Tom. I'd like to close by asking each of our panelists one question. If there's one thing people here today, especially policymakers, community leaders, should understand about the role that legal services can play in supporting survivors of domestic violence, what you can do, what would that be? I'll start again with you, Alicia.
If there is one thing to understand, it is this. Legal services is not an add-on service. It is a lifeline for domestic violence survivors. For survivors, legal advocacy is often the difference between continued harm and real safety. It is how someone secures a protection order, maintains custody over their children, stabilizes their housing, and begins to rebuild their lives. From a state coalition perspective, when legal aid is able to represent survivors, outcomes improve. When they're not able to, survivors fall through the cracks. If we are real serious about safety, legal services must be funded, it must be protected, and part of an essential part of the response.
Thank you, Alicia. Thank you. Chief Pickett, I'll turn to you. I'll turn to you with the same question. What is the one thing people here today should understand about the role that legal services and you can play in supporting survivors of domestic violence?
Well, what's really important from the law enforcement perspective is that we cannot arrest our way out of this problem. We just can't. So there needs to be continued support in this space. In our conversations with our local Victims Advocate Resource Center, One Place in Birmingham, Alabama, as Ms. Williamson spoke about earlier, as strangulation being an indicator, I learned in the meeting that we had earlier this year that it's 700, a victim is 700 times more likely, 700% more likely to be a victim of a fatal incident if they're a victim of strangulation, of DV strangulation. So in an effort of solving violent crime, and I know we can say that we know violent crime is an issue in America, correct? Well, the biggest, like she stated, the biggest indicator, and we track the most violent offenders, all types of murderers, robbers, things of that nature. Typically, those guys have and women sometimes, they have a history, somewhere in their history, of domestic violence. They've been abusive to their partner, they've strangled their partner before they decide to pull a trigger or pick up a gun or pick up some other weapon. I'll say that it's important that we have resources in this space because people leave for various different reasons. For men, they may not want to leave, or men or women, but some men don't want to leave because they fear they will not have access to their children. And they don't want to leave the situation because they fear that they may not see their kids. Women oftentimes fear that they might not have the financial backing and the resources, as Tom spoke about earlier, and it's going to be a huge strain on them. So without them feeling supported in various spaces, not just financially, for housing, for legal services, things of that nature, they will end up staying in a situation that could end up fatal. And that's the thing that we don't want to see in law enforcement. I will share a brief story. There was an indictment in Birmingham earlier this week, actually, and it was a case that stood out to me. It happened on Easter Sunday of last year, where there was a young lady that used her vehicle to run over her partner with their daughter in the backseat. And then there was another child on the porch. So she was just indicted, but that's a situation. I don't know what the complete history was in that relationship, but I would imagine, maybe there was some volatility there. If they knew the resources, they could have gotten counseling and could have gotten help. Maybe, I don't know if he didn't want to leave. I don't know if she was also a victim of domestic violence, but that family clearly needed resources. So now we have several children that don't have a mom because she's going to prison if she's convicted. We have a father that's gone. Rest in peace to him and his family. So now we don't want to create a cycle where those kids, they're going to end up being a product of their environment. They're going to end up repeating the cycle. So it's just imperative that the kids have the support, the victims have the support, so we don't continue to see a cycle of domestic violence taking people from their loved ones.
Chief Pickett, I want to thank you for using your platform to provide the convening power in Birmingham to bring the community together and the stakeholders to talk about the issue, and appreciate you sharing that. Tom, I'm going to let you finish it off as our legal aid representative to share your final point.
Thanks, Mitrang. I'm going to share one more client story to help illustrate our rural services in particular. A client of ours named Cheryl, who gave permission to talk about her case, is from Aroostook County, which is by land area the largest county in any state east of the Mississippi River. The largest town in Aroostook has less than 9,000 people. And there are very few attorneys of any kind, legal aid or otherwise. So Cheryl was in a serious car accident and suffered a traumatic brain injury. And after the accident, her husband prevented her from going anywhere or talking to anyone, and he kept her secluded, told her condition embarrassed him, called her derogatory names, and threatened to have her committed. The day after Christmas, Cheryl was knocked unconscious and seriously hurt. She had no memory of the incident, but her husband said she had fallen and hit her head on the tub, but he did not call an ambulance or bring her to the hospital. A week later, on her birthday, he started a fight with her, and she called the police, but he threatened to have her committed. She got scared and did not follow through with the police report. But then later on in January, she walked into our office, a small storefront on Main Street in Presque Isle, and said she wanted to talk about getting help dealing with her landlord. But while she was doing the intake with our paralegals, she disclosed that she was afraid of her husband. And as the story came out, we realized what she needed for protection, and an attorney named Lisa helped her file for and win a protection from abuse order that included ultimately an agreement with a firearms prohibition, authority for her to stay in the home and keep the car, protection of the pet, and spousal support for Cheryl. After the PFA was finalized, she changed the locks and reported that she felt empowered by standing up for herself. And through the course of accessing legal aid, she's gone from fearing for her life when she walked in the door of our office to having safety and stability going forward.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for leaving us on that note of hope and appreciation for the trauma-informed and survivor-centered ways that all of you are looking to support the network and be a part of the solution for survivors. I want to thank you, Alicia, Tom, Chief Pickett, for joining us today. On behalf of the Legal Services Corporation, I want to thank each of you and your teams and the networks that you are a part of for the work that you do every day to support and protect domestic violence survivors. Thank you. As I mentioned before, we have resources available. As I mentioned before, there's resources available at the DC Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Please find our team members if you'd like to speak and learn more.
My name is Father Pius Petrick. I'm the Vice Chair of the Board of Directors of the Legal Services Corporation, and it is my very distinct pleasure to be here to present the LSC Champion of Justice Award to Senator Dan Sullivan of Alaska. This is an award that we don't give out very often, and when we do, it's to those who really deserve it. Throughout his career, Senator Sullivan has spearheaded efforts to protect Alaska's most vulnerable. You've heard stories about the vulnerable people that our grantees protect every day. As Alaska's Attorney General, Senator Dan Sullivan launched Alaska's Choose Respect initiative, holding rallies across the state to help domestic violence, the exact people whose stories we've heard today, survivors of sexual assault, their families. As a member of the Senate, he pioneered the Choose Respect Act, which designated October 1st as National Choose Respect Day, which coincided with Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and he has, throughout his career, led bipartisan initiatives such as the Pro Bono Work to Empower and Represent Act to expand legal services for survivors. In addition, not only a helper to domestic violence victims, but also to veterans. Senator Sullivan is himself a veteran, longtime champion in Congress to his fellow veterans to make sure they receive the benefits and services that they have been promised and that they have more than earned. He's one of a special group of Alaskan attorneys who have held judicial clerkships at both the highest federal and state courts in Alaska. He has a distinguished record in military and national security service. He's served in the U.S. Marine Corps for 30 years and attaining the rank of colonel. This is not a rank that's given out easily. It's one that is always well earned. He's had multiple deployments around the world to protect our nation. Senator, on behalf of the Legal Services Corporation, thank you. Thank you for your tireless commitment to increasing access to justice, your unwavering dedication to the American people.
Thank you, Father. Yeah, that's a very nice introduction. Thank you.
We're going to take a couple of pictures, and then you'll say a few words.
We're going to do one.
We'll do all, of course.
That's
your people.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to just leave this here so everybody
Great.
can see
Okay.
it.
Well, hey, thank you, Father. I appreciate the kind introduction. I'm very honored by this award, and I want to thank Legal Services Corporation and all your leadership that's been here and for all the great work that you do. I've been a big supporter of legal services way before I became a senator. And then when I came to the Senate, I wanted to work with Legal Services Corporation on all the good work that you do. And it's a real honor for me to be here today to join the advocates, attorneys, leaders, priests, and many others who see that justice becomes a reality for Americans who need it most. For decades, the Legal Services Corporation has led that effort to expand access to legal services across our country. The work that LSC does and the grantees it gets and provides for every day, veterans, already mentioned, survivors of domestic violence, assisting families navigating housing, reflects who we are, in my view, as a country at our best. So I want to do a round of applause for all of you and that good work. Now, my colleagues in the Senate know when I get a microphone, I usually start bragging about Alaska. And that's okay. We have a lot to brag about. Biggest state, most beautiful state. I do have this joke I tell the Texas senators, Senator Cornyn, Senator Cruz, if you split Alaska in half, Texas would be the third largest state in the country. Texans don't like that joke, but it's true, actually. But on a more serious, somber note, one thing that we do have the highest rate of in the country that we're not proud about in Alaska is the highest rates of domestic violence in the nation. And especially Alaska Native women, that's almost 20% of our population, experience horrendously high rates of abuse and murder. In Alaska Native women are 3.5 times more likely to be killed than any other ethnic group. It's just horrendous. So, as you all know, these are not just statistics, these are real people. Mothers, daughters, sisters, neighbors, and I saw this all too often when I was Alaska's Attorney General, which is why I launched this initiative we called the Choose Respect Initiative in Alaska. Many years ago, it still has elements of it, but it was all about saying, hey, we need to change the culture of our state. We need to make it so people don't think that it's okay to abuse their girlfriend or their wife or worse. So we launched a very broad-based strategy. We got the students involved. We did marches on Choose Respect. We passed a lot of laws. But the one thing that we did that I thought was the most important, we reached out to the legal community, to all of you. We reached out to Legal Services Corporation and the Alaska version of that and said, we all need to work to provide more pro bono legal services for survivors of domestic violence. Because you guys have all seen the statistics. You know, this is the power of an attorney. If you get an attorney to help a survivor, the incidences of repeat domestic violence drop dramatically. There is no single panacea to stop domestic violence in any part of America in sexual assault, but I think the number one thing that comes the closest is getting a survivor a lawyer. It's the number one thing that comes the closest. The statistics show it. So we did these pro bono legal summits around the state when I was Attorney General, getting lawyers to sign up to provide legal services to survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. And I brought that idea to the Senate. It was already mentioned when we passed the POWER Act. And the POWER Act is about pro bono work to represent, and it requires federal judges, the chief judge of every federal district, every year to do what I did when I was Attorney General, to hold pro bono legal summits for victims of domestic violence. And that law now is permanent, and the Justice Department does an update on how many survivors have been impacted positively by these pro bono attorneys. The goal was to have an army of lawyers across the country to say, we're going to help. And the last report had that this bill, that doesn't cost a dime, had more than 61,000 attorneys across America do that kind of legal work. 61,000. So that was the idea. And Legal Services has been championing this with us and the judges. By the way, sometimes federal judges don't like being told what to do by members of Congress, but it's kind of like, hey, this is a law and you're a judge, so you better frickin' abide by it, right? So that's what we do every year. And you guys have been right alongside of us on these pro bono legal summits that have literally brought legal services, think about it, to tens of thousands of survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. And so I want to thank Legal Services Corporation. I want to thank Alaska's Legal Services Corporation. Last year, they used the LSC's Pro Bono Innovation Fund to continue the expansion of legal services for survivors in Alaska, and particularly in rural communities where a lot of the legal representation is limited. So we have a long way to go to end the scourge of domestic violence and sexual assault. Certainly in my state, we got a long way to go, but we have made meaningful progress, and our partnership with this POWER Act and everything that Legal Services Corporation has done, we're making a difference. We really are. So I want to thank all of you guys again for your advocacy, for your hard work, and I am truly honored by this Champion of Justice Award, because this is an issue I've been focused on my entire career, and I'm honored to be provided this award by the corporation that's really been the partner in our endeavors to do this in Alaska. So thank you very much. Have a great conference, and I really appreciate the award. Thank you.
And now I am pleased to welcome Father Pius to the Vice Chair of LSC's Board of Directors to give us closing remarks. Thank you, Father Pius.
Thank you all. I'll be brief. But I'm often asked, what is it that Legal Services does? And we've gotten a taste of that here with these two different panels to give you a sense of the type of clients that our attorneys, our grantees deal with. And so you get an idea from talking about the people who do the work. But if you really want to know what LSC does, there are these posters here. All of them have QR codes. I want you to listen to Pierre and to Larry, listen to Colleen, and listen to Monica. Those are the people who are helped by our grantees. Those are the poor who are in trouble, who are vulnerable, who need support, who lack justice, and who are helped. Those are the people who begin with a tragic story rewritten with a happy ending. A happy ending that's brought about not by a knight in shining armor, but by a lawyer with a legal pad. I like to say that our lawyers are the true heroes of legal services, and they are. And I want to thank, first of all of you who are involved in the front lines of the work of legal services, who encounter these people whose stories we have available for you and turn their sad stories into happy ones. And also, I want to thank the people who have made this afternoon such a success for us. We are here today because of the kindness of Senator Sullivan and his staff, who have really helped work to make these events possible for us, and who, more importantly, has spent a career in access to justice and helping people who are victims of violence. We also want to thank, too, Senator Dick Durbin, who is also the other recipient of our Champion of Justice Award. We'll talk with Dick Durbin a little bit later tonight at our reception at the Supreme Court. And you see, they're waiting for us to go, and I'm sorry, is the staff of the Architect of the Capitol Police, who are very kind to us and very accommodating to us, even when we're a few minutes late. Thank you to our team, the leadership at the Legal Services Corporation, and finally, thanks to all of you who have taken time out of your day to be with us today to support the work of legal services. And I hope you will leave today continuing to support our work, bringing others into the rewriting the stories of those in need to be heroes in the championship for justice for legal service. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Take care.